Welcome, everybody, to another episode of our Youturn podcast. Today, we have a friend of mine who I've known for a few years. His name is Adam Fisher. He's an author, which I just learned about. And he is just a great guy. He's in recovery. And I just want to welcome you to the show, Adam Fisher.
Thank you for having me on the podcast today, Elizabeth.
Yes, I'm glad to have you. So just to get the audience to know you a little bit better, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that I didn't tell you beforehand. But so what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a scientist when I was a little bitty boy. I went to college to get a degree in journalism. I wanted to be a writer.
And you became one. How interesting. Most people say something and they become something else. Like I wanted to be a veterinarian. Now I just have a bunch of dogs. And then also, I think it's interesting to know what your favorite band was. It could be growing up or your favorite band now, favorite band of all time. Music says a lot about our emotional state, I think.
Jimi Hendrix.
Ooh, we could go deep on analyzing that. That's a good, heavy, dark music. But with a lot of spiritual references. So that's good stuff. So Adam, I do want to touch a little bit on your personal recovery story, because I think it's important for our listeners to know that there is hope, there is recovery. It is possible. For me, 17 years. For you, I don't know how many years. We met in a fellowship and that we both attend. And so with that, I'm just going to let you tell us a little bit about what brought you to recovery. I know it wasn't the best day of your life when you walked into a fellowship.
Sure. I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means for me is I haven't had any drugs or alcohol in my system since July the 8th of 2008. So it's been 15 years by the grace of God. And
Congratulations.
I started drinking and using when I was 14, and that went on for the next 28 years. I tried many times to quit. I was having problems with health, law enforcement, family, work, all the consequences that are negative that you can have from addiction. And I thought there was no way out. I felt like I was trapped in quicksand. And I finally found recovery in the 12-step programs. And also I go to Favor Greenville, which is a self-help recovery group.
Adam, how did you get into recovery? Like I know I had to go to treatment, and it was sort of, it wasn't forced, but an incident kind of made me wake up and realize that I needed treatment. What was the impetus to get you to try to get recovery? Was it something tragic, or was it just one day you woke up and said, I'm done?
Well, it was a series of events. None of them were major, but put together they were. And then I went to treatment, but when I got out of treatment, I went and started hanging out with my old friends again. And that turned out to be bad. I went back to the alcohol and drugs, and it took me a couple more years, but I went back to the 12-step programs. And this time I took the suggestions that were made to me. And part of that included getting away from the people in my life that were self-destructing from alcohol and drugs. I had to find a new way to live, and that meant finding new people to be my friends.
That sounds easy, but it's very difficult. And they always tell us when we first get to recovery is the only thing you have to change is everything. And it's really tough, especially at a younger age, to give up your friends that you think are very, very important. And we're going to touch on a lot of your book, and it's really written for parents helping to keep their kids out of the situation that we got ourselves in. And I imagine that one of the hardest things when you're a kid is to change your friend group, but we'll get into that. Is there anything else you'd like to say about your recovery or your program before we jump into the book, Unbreaking the Brain?
Sure. I would like to make one point. I've been sober for 15 years now, but the way I see it, I'm only as good as today. And I have to spend some time every day feeding my recovery. If I don't feed my recovery, I will go back to my alcohol and drug usage. So the 1 hour minimum I spend a day in recovery at a meeting or with people in recovery, that 1 hour represents 4% of my day. So if I can invest 4% of my day in my recovery, it tends to help me dramatically improve my chances of staying sober.
It's funny. People always say, why do you still go to meetings? It's like, you go to 2 a week? I said, yeah, it's 2 hours. How many hours a day do you think I drank? And they just look at me like, yeah. So I can't give 2 hours of my time to something that keeps me alive and afloat. So I'm right there with you. I agree that we have to give as much time to that, or as almost as much time to that as we did to our addiction. I want to read what I found on, I think it was your LinkedIn, but it's about your book because it sort of just sums it up. And really, fentanyl is in the news. If you haven't heard about it yet and you're a parent, listen up. It is killing our kids, and it doesn't matter if you're from a nice family in a gated community and go to the best private school, or if you're a stay-at-home kid who lives, in a much poorer neighborhood. It really doesn't discriminate. These pills that are counterfeit, that have fentanyl in them, are being handed out like candy. And listen, if you're drunk and you're a kid and your inhibitions are lowered, I don't care how wonderful your child is or straight A student, they could easily pick up one of those pills and take it and be dead that night. And what this says is fentanyl is a mass murderer of Americans. Unbreaking the Brain, helping your child escape drug addiction, provides real world strategies parents can use to thwart decisions that may cost a teen their life. So, with that being said, kind of get us back to what you've written. A lot of books, but this one really spoke to me because it's almost like Addiction 101 written for someone who not only is struggling, but for the parent or the loved one, which there's very few books written on that. It's all written from the addict or the alcoholic's perspective after they get sober, but not on prevention so much. So tell me what led you to write this book. What was the seed?
Well, I've seen a lot of families be torn apart by the fentanyl overdoses. It can hit anybody in America. It's not just New York and in Atlanta and Los Angeles. We're talking about Greenville, South Carolina, and Pensacola, Florida. And like you
Yep.
mentioned, teens are in an experimental phase of their life. There's also this mindset of I'm invincible, I'm young, it can't happen to me. And the way they're producing these fentanyl pills, they can make it look just like a regular old pain pill that somebody might steal from their parents' medicine cabinet or something. They think it's harmless. And then once they take it, in a matter of minutes, they're dead, and the family just doesn't know what happened. And so the key is to just not put anything in your body like that. And that way you can kind of eliminate that from happening. But I saw a lot of tragedy around me, and I wanted to put my writing talents to work finding something to help those folks.
Yeah. If you could explain on the back of your book, you do the little test. Tell us about that someone could do before their kids go to a party.
Sure. One great strategy for parents is hold out your hand and put 6 aspirin in your hand. Tell your teenager that 3 of the aspirin are vitamins and 3 are rat poison, and ask them to pick one of the pills and eat it. And when they decline, because they might get the rat poison, you ask them, how do you know you're not getting the rat poison when you're getting a pill from one of your friends or a street dealer that you see? How do you know you're not getting it from someone at a party that seemingly is giving you something that's just going to impair you like alcohol does?
That's great. I mean, that's the scary game that they're playing. And I don't know what gets overblown and what doesn't, but I hear that it is in vapes now. It's in, marijuana that's been, what do you call it, created in a lab. They add fentanyl to it. And so you honestly, when we grew up, you could try drugs and yeah, it was a bad thing, but you could try, say, a Xanax at a party and just get really intoxicated. But now most of the Xanax that you get on the street has fentanyl in it. So
It's one strike and you're out.
yeah, I love the way the book goes through. I mean, literally almost every single thing that I've learned in recovery and then some. Some of the things that I wasn't aware of that I think some parents might find interesting is the deadly game of spice is one of your chapters. And I just want to know your take and what you learned writing this book about marijuana of today, because it truly is not the marijuana that my father grew up on. what's going on with it? What is spice? What's going on with the synthetic marijuana? How is it hurting our kids? And what should parents know about it?
Well, the spice is just one brand of synthetic marijuana. It's done in a laboratory. It's chemicals that mimic the effects of marijuana from a intoxication standpoint, but the side effects are terrible. It can create psychosis, hallucination, extreme agitation. People are fighting the police. People are jumping out of cars, crazy stuff that you just can't believe. And what happens is the government wants to put the stop to that kind of stuff. So they, in the laboratory, figure out the chemical composition of these drugs. And once they do, they outlaw it. And then the underworld crime people, they change one of the molecules in the thing. And so now they've got a brand new drug that isn't illegal anymore. And so from a legality standpoint, they've changed the equation on it. And then once the government figures it out, they'll outlaw that. Then the bad guys will go back in the lab and change it again. And so it seems to be skirting the law, and they always make it very, they want to target it towards teens. And they put it in flashy, fancy packaging, and they portray it as harmless, you know, incense, they call it, not for human consumption, but we all know that that's exactly what they're smoking.
Does it cause an addiction, a physical addiction?
It can cause a physical addiction. It has all the components of that. And a derivative of the same kind of stuff is called bath salts. And that mimics the effects of amphetamines or cocaine, things like that. And these drugs they haven't been tested on any human. They've been tested on mice sometimes. There's no idea of how much can be a lethal dose, a fatal dose, what the long-term effects are. Some people have had to be hospitalized for a month at a time because
Wow.
they just got blown out by the drugs. And science hasn't, or the medical community hasn't figured out what the total devastation of these drugs is yet.
It's crazy. How do kids smoke it? I'm looking through this chapter and I can't find how they put it in a vape, or they put it in like a pot, a roll, a joint.
They do the blunts, they do roll a joint, they put it in a bong, they put it in a pipe. Sometimes they can take the bath salts and boil it down. They actually sometimes snort that and even inject it. The synthetic marijuana most prominently is smoked. And,
Okay.
within just a few minutes, they think they're just going to get high. And what happens is they start experiencing psychosis, and some people overdose and die.
So if I were a parent and I was going through my kid's room or searching their bags, that kind of thing, what do you think? What should give me stop and pause? A vape, or I mean, how do you know if your kid's just vaping nicotine, which you don't want them to do, but if they say, "Mom, Dad, I'm just vaping nicotine when I go to parties or whatever." How is there a way to know if there's spice or any of the synthetic marijuana in their vape?
I would ask to look at the packaging that the vape came in and see what the
Okay.
packaging says, because a lot of times the packaging will put this disclaimer in there that, this is for uh, purposes of incense or novelty or something, and try to um, distance themselves from the fact that it's actually a harmful drug.
Yeah. And it seems like there's no stigma amongst young people on what they're doing. Like it when we were growing up, people who did heroin, oh my gosh, you did not, of course we were over here doing cocaine, but you didn't associate with people doing heroin. But it seems like now, just talking to my kids, that everybody does everything and it's all accepted. Which is really scary because it seems like you're more on the outside if you don't try something or do something. I just want parents to understand that their kids are probably going to try stuff, um, and they can't today because they die. Um,
Here's
another,
another thing, Elizabeth, is
yes,
that the
please.
internet has really opened up a lot
Oh,
more access to these types of drugs. So a parent can always try to get on the computer and see what their browsing history is of their child to see if they were looking for a way to get any of that kind of stuff.
that's a great idea. So get
Yeah.
into the computers, get into the phones. I also heard another way to get it is through not Instagram, but some of these accounts that you can go in and it looks to be one thing, but it's really undercover drug operation. And they do sell through Instagram, right? Some drug dealers.
They use every method possible.
Okay. Another chapter that really caught my eye because of what we do at Youturn Health is we help the 10% that'll never raise their hand. You have a chapter called Hope for the 90%. Why is it that 90% of people who need help never ask? Kids included.
A lot of times it's pride. A lot of times they think that they might be disciplined somehow. They think they might lose out on an opportunity, like if they're on a sports team or something and they admit to usage or whatever. There may be an employment consideration. There's a lot of things that would be holding them back, but mostly it's pride and probably fear of repercussions from the parents.
Yeah, I agree. What would you say to a parent who has found some paraphernalia in their child's room? You're not going to say yell at them. That doesn't do any good. What do you say?
I would sit down and talk with them, and I would just point out the fact that, you're going to get that high the first time, and then you're going to spend the rest of your life chasing that same feeling. And it's eventually going to siphon out all of your energy and your money and your emotions. And it puts you in a miserable state of mind. And once you get into addiction, to a certain extent, you're trapped, and you can help them not get trapped. But once addiction is set in, then you have to approach it from a healthcare standpoint, like what you just said. It's not that addicts are bad people trying to get good. They're sick people needing to get well.
That's right. And the last thing, a child needs if they are struggling with an addiction is a parent that judges. I had a 17-year-old tell me that she's addicted to something, and it's marijuana, but said she could never talk to her parents about it because they wouldn't understand, but I would because I'm in recovery. And that people should be able to go to their parents. So educating the parent, the fact that their kid's not morally a bad person, but they're just being a kid and trying things. And these things are so addictive, they get addicted to it really fast. And so ways to talk to your kids I think is very important. I'm not sure if you have a chapter in here. You have, how to talk to a friend, but all of that is very important. Another part that I wanted to point out, because we talk about this a lot in our program, is our pause symptoms. I feel like that's something that we don't talk about enough, because a lot of times when kids have been at college and they've been using, and then they come home and the parent says they sleep all the time, they're really agitated. That to me could be pause. So most parents or people who've never used drugs don't understand what that is. Could you explain that to our audience?
Yes, it's withdrawal symptoms basically, and restlessness, irritability, and discontent are typically emblematic of somebody that's been using and is currently withdrawing from the drug or alcohol. The pause get worse the longer you use a substance. And one thing parents can do is really use the internet to their advantage to find out what new drugs are being put on the street and what some of those withdrawal symptoms are from some of those drugs. The book talks about some inhalants, which is like model glue or gasoline or something. And a lot of these things are just so readily available in the stores and stuff that it's so easy for a teen to get a hold of. And you want to go ahead and look for clues of usage. For instance, if they've been doing inhalants, they might have sores on their nose and mouth from the rag that had the inhalant on it. So you look for physical clues like that.
And PAWS, just so our audience knows, stands for post-acute withdrawal syndrome. Right. And some of these include mood swings, loss of pleasure from activities that they once found enjoyment in, insomnia, anxiety, sleep disturbances, cognitive impairment, depression and fatigue, drug cravings, sensitivity to stress. And then there's one that's called dual diagnosis. Can you tell us about that? Because a lot of people say, my child just might have a mental illness. They can't be addicted. Is it the cart before the horse kind of thing?
Well, a A lot of people, and especially teenagers, they're self-medicating to deal with some mental illness that may not have been addressed from a doctor yet. And
Right.
so what they're doing is they're drinking or using to um, help deal with emotions and mental illness that they can't handle. And so they not only have the addiction aspect, they also have the mental illness, and the two go hand in hand. A lot of times when somebody becomes is in recovery from drugs and alcohol, then the mental illness comes to the forefront more often, and that way they can go to the doctor and get that taken care of. In my personal journey, the doctor was asking me, "Are you drinking or using?" And of course, I was saying, "Of course not."
No.
And no, and eventually, and the medicine was not working, and eventually he sat me down and said, "Listen, until you get sober, I'm trying to hit a moving target." So the fact that you need to be sober in order for the mental health medicine to work is very important to understand.
Right. Otherwise, it's just a perpetual cycle of trying to feel better and making it worse. Um, Another chapter, I mean, honestly, I just want everybody to understand that this book goes through from the head to the toes, physical and mental addiction and what goes along with it. And I know with mine, depression was a huge part of it. And the chapter I underlined, depression, wrong and right. Um, we've just been going through this in our family. Um, a lot of times it mimics lethargy, um, lack of luster for life, laziness is what a lot of parents might see in their child. Tell us a little bit about depression and what some people think causes it and what actually causes it, because this is very important. Um, and again, a lot of kids, young adults, self medicate if they're depressed, and that definitely is a depressant. Alcohol is, so it makes you more depressed.
Right. Well, there's normal depression and grief. Like if you have a relative that dies, that's a normal grief situation to go through. The depression related to mental illness and drug and alcohol addiction is different. Basically, the brain has chemicals that try to even it out as far as being emotionally level. And when
Uh-huh.
you take the drugs to get high, you're reducing chemicals in the brain that are involved in that. So the brain tries to overcompensate either by producing less of the dopamine or more of the dopamine. And so the fact that it's always trying to level out when you are putting drugs into the equation, it the brain is constantly off balance chemical wise. And so
Okay.
it's a chemical imbalance of the brain, but can have physical manifestations like the constant sleeping, being despondent, being withdrawn, lack of interest in things, and it's if someone's hungover and they're experiencing depression, it can just magnify it and look much more of a medical problem than it might be.
Yeah, I really have heard the term, suck it up my whole life. And, quit focusing on yourself too much. You're not depressed, you're just tired. Go eat something. All of that is not very helpful. What let's see, what else do I have? Oh, trauma blocking. Can you talk to us a little bit about, you hear trauma in the news, trauma informed, trauma therapy, trauma this, trauma that. What is trauma and how do we try to block it out of our brain?
Trauma is an intense experience that someone might have. Um, Typically, people in the military that have seen combat, you have your traumatic experiences, and that stays with them. Because of that, they want to medicate and try to soothe those emotions. To try to hide the trauma, a lot of people will be addicted not only to drugs or alcohol, but they might find other things like gambling, for instance, to try to help cover up those feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone is a teenager and they've experienced trauma, a lot of times they're pushing that trauma down into the bottom of a bottle of alcohol, and this goes on and on for years. So when they finally do become clean and sober, they've got a lot of stuff come to the surface that really needs a professional's attention.
Yeah, and trauma can also be, consistent bullying when you're a kid, and then you get to 6th grade and someone offers you a beer and you drink it, and then all of that weight of that being bullied and feeling insecure and all that goes away. So you can see why it's a temporary solution, but that problem stays with you forever. You have a lot on the science behind alcoholism. Do you want to touch on that briefly? Because I think that's important for people to know that it's not a moral failing, that it actually is a scientific manifestation of a disease.
Sure. When a normal person drinks, their body metabolizes the alcohol. They urinate it out, they sweat it out, they metabolize it. When an alcoholic drinks, the alcohol goes up through the central nervous system to the brain, combines with a chemical called dopamine, and produces a byproduct called tetrahydroisoquinoline. Now, how's that for a
Whoa.
$20 word? But what that is, it's basically the second cousin to morphine. And tetrahydroisoquinoline, the derivative that happens when an alcoholic drinks, that chemical in their mind, it's as powerful as morphine or heroin. And so what it does is it goes to the part of the brain that says, I need oxygen to survive, I need water to survive, food to survive. And it locks itself in that survival part of the brain. And that's why it becomes so very powerful. The body and mind have been conditioned that it needs that substance in order to survive. And that's why it can be so hard to abstain from drinking once you are addicted to it.
How do you know when you cross the line?
Well, if you're thinking about trying to control alcohol, it's already controlling you, is part of my philosophy. The other thing is take an honest look at yourself and ask yourself if you've put your drinking in front of things that are important to you. Are you having your relatives or neighbors pick up your kids from school because you've been drinking? Are you missing out on work meetings or showing up late because you were hungover? Just be honest with yourself. And also in the book is a little self checklist to see if you might have some of the conditions that point towards there's a drinking or drug problem.
Well, okay, so let's take this book and take you, Adam, and put you in front of 500 parents.
Mm-hmm.
Because this book is very thorough and very long, and I can't go through the whole thing. What would you say to them would be maybe the number 1, 2, or 3 things that they could do to keep their kids off drugs?
Well, number one, get to know your kids' friends. And that way, if your child is thinking about doing some drugs, and also, I hate to talk about this, but if they're thinking about suicide, their friends would know about it, and then, have them feel comfortable enough to tell you. So get to know your kids' friends. Number 2, try to have positive outlets for your kids' time and energy after school and stuff. Get them involved in sports or some sort of activity where they can have enjoyment and have their time taken up where they're not off seeking out drug or alcohol experiences. The other thing is to go ahead and talk to the kids about how, give them case studies of people that have died from, say, fentanyl overdose when they were the captain of the football team. They were on the dean's list, made great grades, but they were drinking one night at a party. Somebody gave them what they thought was a Xanax, had fentanyl in it, and now they're dead. You can find some case studies like that on the internet and just show them, say, listen, this is real world stuff and this can happen to you. So be careful.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to the parent who knows their kid is doing drugs? Does every kid need treatment? What are the steps? I found some marijuana in my kid's room. What would be the first step for them?
Well, I think the first thing is to sit down and talk with them. They're probably going to be standoffish and defensive, which is a normal reaction from a drug addict or person that's involved in drugs.
Yeah.
Looking into getting a intervention with a professional that can point out some of the therapeutic ways they can get help. Also having family get together with them and express to them they're worried about them. Seeking out the guidance counselor at school is helpful. You might need a third party because the parents are emotionally invested in the situation. And in addition to their giving information about it, the child may need, a third party that's not emotionally invested in the situation. And, your family doctor for that matter. But the important thing is to do something. Don't just sit idly by.
Right. And what would you say to the parent who maybe says, we feel like we have an open communication, we drink in the house. Why should we tell our kids not to drink and try drugs if we did? What would you say to that parent? Because I've had that literally happen to me today. And I'm curious what your answer to those parents would be.
Well, like you pointed out, alcohol and drug is not the same as it is when we grew up.
Exactly.
With fentanyl, it's a one strike and you're out. It's not, did you try
Yeah.
some marijuana and get in trouble at school? It's, if you take that fentanyl, you might die right away. Then the other drugs like the spice and the bath salts and synthetic marijuana and stuff, we don't know what that's going to do. And so I would point out, some of the sad stories that have gone along with that. There's a thing called pink, which is a derivative of bath salts. And this is what you've seen on TV where people get on the interstate, jump out of their car, take off their clothes, and chase down somebody and try to eat the flesh off their arm. I mean, it sounds unbelievable, but this is what these drugs can do to you. And it can do it to the most normal mind of all, the kid that's making good grades and stuff. So I guess I would say, things have changed. Number two, don't set yourself up for the misery that I might have gone through when I was your age, and now I've got a drinking problem and I have a hard time dealing with it. The other thing is, if there is addiction or alcoholism in the family, that should be pointed out to the kids as well. That there is a genetic component to this, and if the grandparents or parents or aunts or uncles, if there's a history of alcoholism, that's a red flag that you might be susceptible to.
Absolutely. Mental illness and addiction definitely have genetic components. And if you play along with it, around with it long enough, sure enough, you're going to turn on that gene. Is the way I look at it. Another powerful thing is on page 8 that you did in this book, and it's a letter from a child to the parents. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this part really got me. It doesn't matter. So this is a child saying that is addicted, saying to his parents, his or her parents, it doesn't matter that I'm a good athlete and made the starting lineup. I could win every tournament and still unwittingly sabotage my brain. My competitive spirit and desire for success are defenseless against active addiction. It doesn't matter that I've had a good upbringing or that you've been good role models. Alcohol and other drugs can seep into my life in a million different ways. And this is what the parents of addicted children need to hear. It is not your fault. You did not cause it. You cannot cure it, and you cannot control it. Because that is the part that I think where everything falls apart is when the parent begins to blame themselves and say, what did I do wrong? And then in their embarrassment and the stigma and the shame, they neglect getting help and bury the problem, and or they think they can control it and you know ground the child, keep them in their room forever, and that'll just go away. And none of that works. I mean, you and I know that wouldn't have worked for us. So um without reading the whole book to our listeners, what else in there, is there anything else that you feel like we need to tell? I hope that this book could be put in the hands of parents of PTAs and youth groups across the country. What would you like to leave our audience with today besides go get your book, which hold up your sign, because I want everyone to know where they can find your stuff is fishright.net. I will link that in the show notes, as well as his other books and a link to Amazon to buy Unbreaking the Brain, if that's where you like, or can you buy it off your website?
You can get it. The link's on the website.
Okay.
Yep.
What do you see as the biggest drug? Maybe I'm trying to look for one drug that you think is taking us out. It's obviously fentanyl. What do you think fentanyl is most put in that the parents can warn their kids about? Is it synthetic marijuana? Is it Xanax? What is it that you're most seeing it in?
Sadly, it's everything. Even street
Okay.
level marijuana dealers are putting some of it in there. And that's crazy. They're putting it in cocaine, heroin. But, when I heard that it's on the streets in street level marijuana dealing, that's a real red flag. Marijuana has been portrayed as seemingly harmless, to
Right.
teens and stuff. But when you introduce the idea of fentanyl, it's a whole different ball game. And again, the same, if you're smoking it or you're taking it in a pill form, it can have devastating consequences. I would say, parents, um, you need to frequent the internet to find out what kind of drugs are out there, where the fentanyl is being hidden at, and what kind of new drugs are being thought up, because the chemical underworld, especially in China, is constantly coming up with these new things targeted towards teens.
And they
And
can order it online, right?
you can order it online. You can order the raw chemicals online. A lot of them, they can do it in an anonymous way, so they don't face legal implications. And that's the thing. The other part is get to know your kids' friends, get to know who they're hanging out with, and make sure those friends are comfortable talking to you. If the friends see that your child is experimenting with synthetic marijuana, bath salts, fentanyl, whatever, make sure they feel comfortable enough to come to you so that you can help provide, some therapeutic guidance there.
Yeah. And also the suicide thing you mentioned, hate to bring that up, but one thing that I've learned in doing the work that I do for Youturn Health is that talking about it to your kid does not give them the idea to do it. It actually is a very, very healthy way to open the lines of communication. It's been proven time and time again that that does not cause a child. In fact, it will help them to feel more comfortable to bring it up. Hey, mom and dad, I have had some suicidal thoughts, and it could be from depression. It could be from drug use that's caused depression. But I know I've been there before, and to tell someone was the most frightening thing. It was more frightening than having the thoughts because of what I thought the way they would see me. So if I could say anything to parents, it's talk about everything openly. There's nothing that you should leave off the table. These days, it's death. It's not, playing around. Is there anything else you would like to talk about today to leave our audience with? Do you want to tell us about, do you have any other recovery books that you want to tell us about? Or is this the one and done recovery
That,
book? It's enough.
yeah, this is the main one. I wrote one a few years ago
Uh-huh.
called Speaking of Recovery. It's some individual stories of sobriety. But this one is much more thorough. This one approaches the medical and scientific components as well as the emotional components. How a parent can enable their child to continue
Yep.
addiction, or they can kind of direct them towards help. And there's a
Yep.
lot of gray area for parents. Am I hurting my child? Am I helping my child? And so the book really lays it out, helps you understand that. And the common thing with parents that are facing a child with drug or alcohol addiction, or that have been involved in a suicide, is where did we go wrong? And what you
Yep.
pointed out, it's not their fault. They didn't cause it. They can't cure it, but they can help the healing. And that all starts with communication. And, if they're on the internet looking up what synthetic marijuana is and does, have their kids sit right there with them and read it together and read
Yep.
these horror stories of people that go to the emergency room and they're high blood pressure and other vital statistics are off the charts because the drugs can't be counteracted. And then all of a sudden they're having seizures and die. And I think, it's almost like a scared straight type of scenario when they get to hear the firsthand stories of that. So sit down with your kid in front of the internet and show them what is going on.
I agree with you. What age do you think, Adam, is the best to start this? I say fifth grade.
I think as soon as a child is able to start speaking, the number one thing I would drill into society at large, and really the government should be doing this in a television campaign, but is saying if you don't pick up the first one, you won't become addicted. If you don't pick up the first one, you won't overdose. So prevention is a real big key here. And I know Youturn focuses on, what can we do after addiction set in, or what can we do after the effects of it. But in a perfect world, prevention would be the key to the whole thing. So I would say get these kids, read the book with your kids at fifth grade, sure, fourth grade, something like that.
I mean, it's very easy to read. It's easily spelled out. I love the font. I love the things that you put at the bottom. Like every so often there's a little phrase at the bottom, like when I enjoy my drinking, I can't control it. When I try to control my drinking, I can't enjoy it. Don't trip over what is behind you. And all these are all the way through the book. And then in the back, you have like a glossary of of drugs. Then you have, I mean, you have just about everything. So I think that it has recovery plans. It has ways to stay positive and away from drugs, how to change your behavior, pretty much everything. I think this should be used in schools. And anyway, I just can't say enough good things about it. I've really enjoyed it. I thought I knew everything. Obviously, I did not. I have 3 children, 2 adult children, 1 15-year-old. I'm definitely going to read this with him and show stuff to him because I know that he's already seeing friends of his vaping, smoking pot, probably drinking. So yeah, it's taking the time to have that hard conversation, and I just appreciate you, Adam, writing this book, and I hope everybody goes out and gets it because we always assume that everyone knows as much as we do because we've been living this life for 15 years, but they just don't. Some people have never, they just don't know anything about it. So this is a good place to start. So Adam, thank you so much. And I know I'll be seeing you around in our meetings, and I just appreciate you and proud of you for writing. I had no idea you were such a prolific author. So congratulations on the new book, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Bye.